Hi everyone. Today I'm starting a new series of book and movie pairings that we're calling Terrifying Trios. Each month I'll give you 2 horror movie recommendations and a book that complements them. These books and movies will share a theme of some kind, and for our first episode I thought I'd start with a bang. That's why the theme of this episode is cannibalism. Sources for this episode include the New York Times, the New York Post, and Wikipedia. Content warning. The movies and book I'll be discussing today contain graphic depictions of murder, cannibalism, pet death, and implied or overt physical and or sexual assault, as well as strong language and one instance of racist language. Viewer and reader discretion is advised. And with that, let's start with our first movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This 1974 cult classic defined the slasher genre as we know it today. Of course, this is the timeless story of people on a road trip who find a house somewhere in the American Southwest, probably Texas, and are then murdered at this house and or eaten by the cannibals that live there. Sally, played by Marilyn Burns, is the only survivor. Now, right off the bat, we have to discuss a couple of things. First of all, horror movies are something I enjoy that I'm also deeply critical of. Especially older movies, they're often racist and or sexist. Of course, you often have a lone woman or final girl as the only survivor of movie carnage, so these films can really run the gamut from feminist to exploitative. And sometimes they're both. Basically, I'm the sort of person who watches these movies in part because I want to make fun of them. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I'm a big fan of Mystery Science Theater 3000. To me, liking something doesn't mean you're not critical of it. It means you see the ways that it's great, and, I want horror as a genre to be better. And as we've seen with, the recent films of, Jordan Peele, for example, it can be. I mention this because I first watched The Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2015 after visiting Seattle's Museum of Pop Culture, where they had a great exhibit on horror movies. Now, I tend to like older horror movies because they are so clearly fake. Even when something as scary is happening, the effects are such that it rarely looks real. They're often more funny than scary. But older horror films can feel very real. And part of the reason why, with a movie like this, is that sometimes the desperation you see in the performers is real. The famous cannibal dinner scene in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was filmed over 26 hours. The temperature was well over 100 degrees, and there were real dead animals in the house. Actors on the set sometimes had to leave so they could throw up due to the awfulness of the smell. And the scene where the cannibal family patriarch sucks on Sally's bloody finger is apparently real. They tried to pull this off with fake blood and a fake finger, but it didn't work. So eventually her finger actually was cut for the scene. Marilyn Burns, the actress, said later, unsurprisingly, that this whole thing was a pretty terrifying experience. Spending so many hours pretending to be held captive by people who are pretending they're going to eat you seems pretty rough. Snuff films were known to be a thing at this time, and there were times when this actress wondered, is that what's happening here? Leatherface is an iconic movie villain, and obviously the spectacle of this movie is something to behold. Its killer and his iconic mask especially, in large part, thanks to the taboo subject of cannibalism. But the more I learn about movies where women were actually terrorized, the more I feel creeped out, and not in a fun way. Something I appreciate about horror is that it's helped me figure out where my limits are in terms of the stuff I want to see in fiction. And of course, it's nice to feel fear that you can just pause or even turn off. So while this is a genre classic, if simulated violence against women squicks you out, maybe skip this one. Sally does escape Leatherface, though, and the kills here are sudden and shocking. The scene where Kirk is killed and Leatherface slides the door shut is particularly quick but brutal, as is the scene with the meat hook. Overall, I give this 3 out of 5 chainsaws. The Hills Have Eyes is our second movie, and this is the 1977 original film written and directed by Wes Craven, who you may know better from the Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream series. This movie features the Carter family, who are attacked by cannibals after the car pulling their RV breaks down in the desert. That's right, more desert cannibals. However, this movie features a twist. First of all, the Carter family has 2 dogs, named Beauty and the Beast. If you've ever seen a horror movie, you can probably see where this is going. The first death of the film is Beauty, the gentler of the 2 dogs. This scene is very fake, but if you don't like movies where a dog dies, heads up. Now what happens next is what really set this movie apart for me. The second dog, the Beast, is initially feared to have also been killed. Nope. Turns out he was hunting cannibals this whole time, and the award for the best horror movie dog that I know of goes to the Beast for pushing a cannibal off a cliff and ultimately helping our hapless family of tourists survive. Most of them do die, but without the Beast, they all would have died. This movie includes the interesting and oft-repeated horror movie trope where it makes the Carter family relatable. Most of us have been on a family vacation. But not so likable that we're genuinely bummed when they start getting killed. The former cop dad, he says something racist, it's revealed that the Beast once killed a poodle, and the Carter family thought that that was hilarious. The whole idea is that you're watching this knowing that most of these people are going to die. But the filmmakers want you to be entertained instead of dismayed by the spectacle of their increasingly shocking deaths. Of course, by the third act, when Jupiter's family of cannibals is discussing eating the baby they stole, you're on the side of anyone who helps that not happen. Now, this is a movie that features a strongly implied sexual assault. I said this for our first movie too, but feel free to skip this one if scenes like that aren't something you want to see. And of course, it bears mentioning that in both of these films, the killers are themselves the products of inbreeding and or abuse. Usually it's a patriarch who starts killing people, or trying to, and the bloody legacy continues down through multiple generations. Why did I pick two movies like this to start with? Because in many, many horror movies, violence both within and against families, as well as violence against women, seems to be a feature, not a bug. So if you haven't seen a lot of horror, keep an eye out for this trend and see what you think of how it's evolved from early horror movies to the present day. To me, scenes of brutal murder are more fantastical. Most of us don't know anyone who's ever been murdered by cannibals. But most of us do know someone who's been a victim of sexual assault or parental abuse, which is why these scenes can be too real for some viewers. Part of the fun of horror is its outlandishness, which is why I'm thankful that this movie ends with two teens blowing up their family's camper to try and kill Jupiter, the cannibal patriarch, which is a nice parallel to how their dad was killed with improvised explosives. Oh, and they used their mom's corpse as bait, and remember the baby's dad kills a cannibal with a rock. Family vacation stuff. I rate this movie 3 out of 5 heroic dogs. Yes, the Beast does survive this movie. You can relax. Bones and All is a fascinating book. It won an Alex Award in 2016, and that means it's an adult book with teen appeal. This is a book that turns the theme of the two movies I just discussed on its head. What if, instead of having to fight and flee cannibals in a desperate attempt to survive, a young woman was herself a cannibal? Marin is the main character here, and the day after her 16th birthday, she goes into the kitchen for breakfast and finds the following note from her mom. "I'm your mother and I love you, but I can't do this anymore." Marin knows that this means her mom has left her, and she is upset and scared, but not terribly surprised, because sometimes Marin eats people. It's not on purpose, but if she gets too close to someone, or if they get too close to her, she will devour them, bones and all. When she's done, there's nothing left but some blood in their clothes. And she doesn't look different when it's over. It even happened when she was a baby. The one time Marin's mom left her with a babysitter, she came home to find her infant covered in blood, a few bones left uneaten, and the babysitter gone. You'd never guess that Marin as a kid, or Marin as a teen, has killed people. But at 16, she is horrified at what she is, because even her mother cannot bear to live with her any longer. So, with some money and her birth certificate in an envelope her mother left, Marin decides to go looking for the father she's never met, because maybe he's like her. He is, but finding this out doesn't help Marin in the way she hopes it will. As she travels across the country, Marin meets people and does her best not to get too close. But sometimes things happen. Cannibalism, yes, but also kind people who help Marin, like an old woman named Mrs. Harmon. And this is how Marin meets an old man named Sully, who also eats people, and Lee, a guy a little older than her, and another eater. They have different strategies. Sully never eats people alive. He waits until they're dead. Lee only eats bad people, and he's determined to help his little sister have a better life. And Marin, well, at first she ate accidentally, involuntarily, but maybe now she eats in self-defense. Or maybe not. Read the book for yourself and follow Marin on her quest to understand herself and her sanguine ability. Why do we like horror? What is it about these stories that's so captivating? There are lots of theories and great books about this phenomenon that I plan to discuss in future episodes, but for me the explanation is fairly simple. When the movie adaptation of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was released, author Victor LaValle wrote a great article about the staying power of that series, and I'll just read you a little bit from the end. He said, "If I felt the world could be a frightening place, and I did, then these drawings, these stories, offered a kind of validation. You're right, they seem to say. The world is wild. That's all I wanted as a child, someone to admit that what I felt wasn't ridiculous or wrong. So much of the world seemed determined to tell me that everything was fine. Thank goodness for books like this one that respected me enough to agree that sometimes it wasn't." So, to me, this has always been the appeal of horror, and I think that's true for many people. If you're an anxious person, a marginalized person, a person who is simply conscious of the many, many things that can and do go wrong on a daily basis in the world, maybe you love horror because it acknowledges that terrible things exist, but they can be defeated. You can survive, at least for a while, in a world that wants to devour you, bones and all. Thanks for listening, and look for episode 2 in April.